Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, or if you are new to FourEyedMonster Miniatures, many thanks for joining me in my journey to unbox and review collectible pre-painted figures, as well as to chronicle the work being done to get scale model kits from sprues and runners to the finished article. After the euphoria of my first pair of premium pre-painted figures as seen in the recent uploads, we are now back to the bread and butter of my personal collection, namely mid-tier figures, of which the Pop-Up Parade series make up the bulk of my collection. Accordingly, we'll be taking a detailed look at the latest addition to my collection, namely Frieren the Elf Mage. Having been a keen consumer of anime content since the 1980s, it takes a lot to get me excited about a new shonen anime. Frieren Deep Beyond Journey's End, however, is just such a show with its cast of delightful characters packaged in a more introspective and slower-paced show akin to slice of life animes, compared with most other shonen titles that focus on battles. And it wasn't long before I was actively seeking out Frieren-based characters to add to my pre-painted figure collection, the end result of which you see in my hands now, namely the Good Smile Company Pop-Up Parade standard size version of Frieren, the protagonist of the show. Being the in-vogue anime series of recent times, there is no shortage of Frieren-based figures at the moment, ranging from budget tier all the way to premium figures. For now at least, I've settled on the lower mid-tier offerings from the Pop-Up Parade lineup, which are known for their accurate recreations of anime characters in 3D form, albeit with fairly simple standing poses in most cases. This Pop-Up Parade version of Frieren will now be subjected to its customary unboxing ASMR, with commentary resuming on the once-over segment that you can get to instantly using the timestamps provided. At the time of recording, Frieren Beyond Journey's End has become one of the most highly rated anime series among fans and critics alike. But I actually got this pre-painted figure of Frieren at the early stages of its popularity, when nearly all good figures of this beloved character were found in the premium tier and priced way beyond my means. While things have gotten better since then, in terms of sculpt and paintwork quality for budget tier price figures, I feel that the majority of what I consider to be excellent representations of Frieren in figure form tend to be still in the premium tier. That brings us to the Pop-Up Parade standard size version of Frieren, which from the casual once-over so far already conveys a supremely accurate 3D representation of the character not only in likeness factor, but also in the recreation of her attire. Everything is packaged neatly within a clean, albeit flat paintwork applied on a fairly static pose. And while a figure's lack of dynamism tends to count against it, this is one of those times when a fairly simple standing pose is the one best suited to the character in question, namely Frieren, who, outwardly at least, has a stoic and slow-paced personality. There are no external accessory parts that needs to be attached separately to the figure itself, as the book being held by Frieren is wedged securely between her arm and her hips. And because Frieren is fairly lightweight and relatively small in size, she was given plastic pegs on her feet, 2 on her right foot and 1 on her left, to be inserted into the 3 holes on the display base. Speaking of which, consists of a simple white round base that, while small in diameter, is thicker than your average figure display base. With this quick look concluded, let's now go ahead with the pop-up parade figures assembly, which might be overly simple for veteran collectors who can skip the segment using the timestamps provided. Official data puts Frieren at about 150 centimeters or 4 feet 11 inches in height, making her one of the shortest characters in Frieren Beyond Journey's End, with perhaps only the dwarven warrior Ison and the elderly hunchback version of the human swordsman Himmel, both being actually shorter than the female elf mage. Frieren's short height is accurately represented in figure form in the shorter than average standard size pop-up parade figure of nearly 16.5 centimeters from head to feet, versus the roughly 17 to 18 centimeters in height that's advertised as the norm for most standard size figures in the official pop-up parade website. Goodsma Company had chosen a static standing pose, which is paired with a predominantly neutral color scheme, save for the gold trims on her attire and the reds of her earrings. In the sea of neutral hues of the figure's color scheme, white seems to have taken center stage due to the predominantly warm whites of Frieren's iconic elf mage attire and the cool whites that's used to represent her long silver hair. These whites dominate the upper 2/3 of the figure. As for the final lower third of the figure, darker neutral hues like navy blue and brown takes over, though it should be noted that the upper 2/3 does have black on the belt as well as stripes on the shirt. In terms of paintwork application, the colors on this pop-up parade figure are fairly flat without any shading or tonal variation. On the midway point, next to her waist, Frieren is seen holding on to the only accessory of the figure. Generally, there are 5 things closely associated with the character in a way that defines her personality, namely a wizard staff, a mimic chest, flowers as well as a flower field spell, desserts like cakes and pudding, and finally grimoires or books of magic. That last item was what Goodsma Company decided to include as an accessory of sorts, in the form of what was painted to look like a brownish red leather covered book with gold designs that mimic the traditional gold leaf decorative technique known as gold tooling. On this lower half of the figure, the dark navy hues of her pants and the dark umber of her boots don't really stand out due to their neutral nature. However, they do provide a contrast of colors to Frieren's white attire and the white display base. Despite its plainness, the round base lack of details ensure attention stays on the figure. Another positive of this simple base is its small footprint, which is a great help in display shelves with limited space. What continues to impress me about the Pop-Up Parade series of pre-painted figures is the consistency in which the lineup manages to maintain the likeness factor of its figures compared to the 2D anime characters they are meant to represent. In Frieren's case, the head and facial details look fantastic and accurate, all the way from her silver twin pigtail hair to her thick eyebrows, her big green eyes, her long pointed ears, to the general shape of her face. Also up close at this upper half view, the whites of Frieren's attire become less overwhelming despite its ubiquitousness, thanks to the aesthetic balance provided by the shiny gold trimmings. Most importantly, in this close-up view, we can see that the paintwork has been applied cleanly, which contributes positively to the overall aesthetics despite the flat colors. Almost every time a pop-up parade pre-painted figure comes under consideration to be a new addition to my hobby collection, I'm almost inevitably torn between two main opposing points vying for preeminence as the determining factor in said consideration. On the one hand, I've come to rely and expect consistently high standards from Goodsma Company in providing miniature 3D forms of beloved anime characters that are highly accurate in their look-alike factor while retaining a fairly reasonable price point ranging from 4,800 yen to 5,500 yen for their regular standard size offerings. On the other hand, the cheapest, lower spectrum offerings of Pop-Up Parade's wide range of mid-tier offerings tend to have fairly static and boring poses. Initial impressions of this pre-painted figure, therefore, were somewhat ambiguous, though obviously not to the extent it deterred the addition of standard-size Pop-Up Parade Frieren to my collection. Contrary to what my misgivings on static and boring poses may imply, having such poses do not automatically condemn it to the scrap heap. There are times when a simple standing pose is the perfect match for a figure, and Pop-Up Parade's version of Frieren is just such a figure. The more I had looked at the pose Frieren has adopted here, the more I've come to appreciate how spot on it is in relation to Frieren's personality that's aloof and stoic. That the pose comes about partly due to cost considerations of a lower-end mid-tier figure is beside the point, for what matters most is how the nuances of a limited pose, like the slight tilt of a head, manage to convey the mannerisms of the character despite restrictions in the dynamism of the pose. Even the flat neutral hues of the figure's color scheme works well here, primarily because whites and off-whites dominate Frieren's mage attire, but also because the paintwork is clean and evenly applied. With all this in mind, I'm giving this Pop-Up Parade standard size version of Frieren a rating of Diamond or A rank, which actually kind of surprised even myself, seeing that initially I was hung up about the flat paintwork. But when I looked at other more premium figures of Frieren on the market, I noticed her predominantly white mage attire and her off-white silver hair colors tend to make the paintwork a non-issue, as it looked flat even on premium pre-painted figures. Don't just take my word for it though. You can gauge the general demand for this figure by checking out its second-hand value, which around mid-May of 2026 was 9,980 yen, an appreciation of more than 100% from its retail price. So essentially, there is a healthy demand for this Pop-Up Parade version of Frieren from pre-painted figure collectors in the secondary aftermarket, now that it's hard to source them from the primary market. Bottom line, I'm delighted to have this little gem of a figure in my collection because it's so on point in every way that a fan of Frieren Beyond Journey's End, like me, would want in a 3D miniature form of this elf mage. Most importantly, she still comes in a relatively affordable price point due to the nature of its lower mid-tier category. Well, that's it for this unboxing and review of the anime world's latest darling. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you soon in my next video. Bye for now, be well, and be happy.